Okay, Be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach. Hashem should help us. We got the Geschmack Sugi of Kufayin Zayin. The Dvarim Aboim B'Toich HaSuda V'Yacha HaSuda. This Gemara is definitely one of the most, I would say, controversial sugyas in HILCHOS BRACHOS. It's a sugya that the sugya seems to say one way. And certainly when I was growing up, there was a minig ha'olam not like that. There was somewhat of an achsha daira in the last yarin. But certainly when I was growing up, you ate bread, and bread patted you from a bracha on your tefillin. When you ate bread, bread patted you from everything. Achsha daira, let's see, learned the sugya, it seems to say not like that. All types of shmuas from the great gedolim and great rabbanim. Let's see first what it says in the sugya. Let's see if we can miyashiv it with some of the Bez Hashem, but we'll take it from the beginning. It's a big sugya. The Gemara BRACHOS and Daf Mem Aleph brings down that it seems to be HILCHOS, Dvarim Aboim Machmas HaSuda, B'Toich HaSuda. Don't need a bracha, lo lefneihem v'lo lachrayim. But if the shaloi Machmas HaSuda, if it's something that's not Machmas HaSuda, then it seems to be it's tayin a bracha before, then not a bracha afterward. There is a shaila, the Prima Godim in the first Prima Godim in the Siman, in the HaRav Zivkotin Aleph, and the Aruch HaShulchan in the first Zivkotin, discuss the methodology of how this bread is going to be pattering chicken, and the bread will be pattering potatoes, and the bread will be pattering the meat, etc. And I give myself the liberty of understanding that the Olam has been learning the sugya already for a week, so I could be a little bit more aggressive in my my assumption of what the Olam knows. But over here, the Prima Godim, when he discusses that the bread pot is the chicken and the bread pot is the meat and the potatoes, he declares Bemis Kain Chakira, which is really related to next week's sugya. He declares, is it Kain and Nikr v'Tofel? Kloimar, just like we understand that if a person has a cracker with a little bit of hummus, he makes a mezainis and he patters everything. So there's another type of tofel. That's a tofel that I'm tofel to the food. Then there could be a tofel that I'm tofel to the cause of the food. The food's cause is to satiate. And I'm tofel to that cause. The bread is the ikar alechem yechei adam. Bread is the ikar main satiating food of the mitzad all the foods. And there's no shaila that bread is the ikar. Who remembers when we were in yeshiva today, the fancy bachrim, what these guys get? Frag nish frag. But when we were bachrim, you got a little shtickle bright, breakfast, it's a little bit of that white stuff, maybe it's, who knows what, Lebanon, I don't know, some soft-boiled egg. Lunch, you got a little bit of the gravy from Shabbos's chicken, and supper was some leftover bread. Everything was bread. And certainly in the times of Chazal, everything was bread. So lechem was al yichi adam kipshutai. Because of that, lechem got the status that all the foods are coming for the same, that are coming for the same purpose of the bread, be it chicken, be it meat, eggs, whatever it is. They're all coming to satiate. A food which is coming to satiate is tofel to the ikir satiating food, which is bread. And therefore, when you make a bracha on moitzi, not that it's tofel to the food, it's tofel to the cause of the food, the cause of the bread. And that's one way of learning. Tofel to the bread is another way of learning, says the Prima Godim. Maybe it's tofel to the bracha. Maybe because bracha of bread is so chashuv, it got a special bracha. It got a special bracha, moitzei lechem in haaretz. So maybe that special bracha was a chashuva, and maybe the bracha patters. Now, there's no shaila. If you make a bracha of moitzei on chicken, you have to have immediate help, because there's no shaila. You can't make a bracha of moitzei on chicken. But I can that you made a bracha on the moitzei, on the bread, and the bracha of a moitzei is a chashuv bracha. It patters everybody that's on its cause. But it's two different ways of understanding. One way is understanding that the bracha is what spreads out its wings. Kivyachol, there was a way, there was a means that we can get this bracha to be chal on chicken, even though we never were able to before. Or no, that the bread is the ikar and the chicken is tofel to the bread. There could be nafkaminas. There could be nafkaminas. Let's see, Bez Hashem, maybe what could be a possible nafkamina. Now, before we get there, just understand the Pashut Halacha. Kumt, the Taisvis, the Rabbi Yitzchak. It's true, Rashi doesn't go like this, but as man kasha, Kotzev, Halacha Meruba. We have to make sure that we have enough time to go through the sugya. So we'll go straight to the Halach L'Maisa, which is Rabbeinu Yoina Shita and Taisus Shita. Rabbeinu Yoina brings Ariya Zokin, and he explains what are Dvarim Aboyim Machmas Hasuda. He says that's very simply said, meat, eggs, cheese, fish. Now he says extreme, the Taisus, the Rabbeinu Yoina, excuse me, that they are called Boyim Machmas Hasuda because the only time you eat them is in a Suda. The poskim later on, because if that would be true, then today people eat meat without bread, and people eat chicken without bread, and people eat eggs and cheese without bread. The Chayodam and the Baal Tanya and Sif Aleph, the Chayodam and Mem Gimel Aleph say, and really Bemis the Mishabura to a certain extent to Sif Katan Aleph, they say a little bit differently the same idea. Since lechem yichya adam, says the Chayodam, lefikach im kava atzmai lechem ubirach, if he made a bracha on bread, harei kol ma sheyochel in the suda me'ad dvarim haregilim lava b'tech suda. It's the normal thing that these things come in a meal. Not that they only come in a meal, but it's certainly normal that you will use it to satiate you. And that's bemis what the Baal Tanya says. He says these are foods that are brought l'tavshel, limuzin. They're brought also for the same purpose, which is to satiate, which is to fill you up. Anything brought for the same purpose to fill you up and satiate gets nitfal to the bread. And that's this halacha. That, of course, now the question today is not why is it, what did the Yana Kennedy at the Gazuk, not what you can do for. The question is not why does bread not pater an apple. The question you have to understand is why does bread pater chicken? That's the question you have to ask. I mean, if you make a bracha of bread on chicken, you make a motzei lechem martin on chicken, so then you're a chicken. So why is it that when you make a bracha on a moitzi, it paters chicken? That's the shaila you have to ask. Kipshutai, we understand very well that bread wouldn't pater an apple or nuts, or we'll see even ice cream or who knows what. The chiddush is, and that's the chiddush of the sugya, is that bread paters chicken and bread paters eggs. Why? That's the chiddush. When you're eating it in a meal and they're coming for the same purpose to satiate, so then that's tuffle to the bread, it's tuffle to the amaitzi, and that's what it says in all these paiskim. And those is halach l'maisa. The first shaila l'mashal, come to Mishabru and Sif Katan Gimel, quoting a Magen Avraham and Sif Aleph, is oy bazoi. Maybe this is totally in our chakira, maybe not. Oy bazoi. Maybe when we say that bread paters, perhaps it's got to be thoughtful to the bread. It has to be a certain chashivas. Maybe it's not enough to have a little tiny piece of bread. Sometimes a person wants to just have a tiny little piece of bread. Fakert, in order not to have to make brachas. Kum to Magen Avraham, and he says, you know what? I don't know. You can be mistopic. Maybe if you're having such a little amount of bread and your full purpose in the bread is just he's coming to pater, and because he's coming to pater, it might not pater. He says, how could you say Betzim doesn't want bread? Betzim doesn't want bread. And Mishabura declares, he says, if it's less than a kazayas, if it's less than a kazayas, derech ha'olam is not to have that amount of bread. Okay, it's not pashit. Mishabur brings out it's a big suffix. It says it's better to get out of the shaila. And what should you do? Don't eat bread. Tell this to a lady on a diet. And Bemis, the Magen Gibarim says it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. If you're just coming to pater the foods, the rice and the adamas and all the different things, so then you can't say they're tuffle to the bread. The Ebenezer says not like that. He says, push it. The paters, because Chazal made a takana of a loy plug. I wonder out loud if it's totally in the shaila, if the way it paters is through the bracha, a chashav bracha paters, whereas then I could hear, so it's a chashav bracha. So who cares that he's not having bread as an ikar, but the bracha paters? Or maybe no, maybe like the other side that we said, that what would pater? Maybe what paters is not the bracha, but that the bread, you're tuffle to the cause of the bread. I just wonder out loud, maybe if you're having a little tiny amount of bread, how could you say it's chashiv and how could you say paters all the other foods? Rav Moshe gives the hachra something in the middle, like the Aruch HaShulchan says in Sif Beis, Rav Moshe is in Chelik Dalet, in Siman Mem Aleph. He says if you had a kazayis, then about the bread paters. A kazayis is already a chashiv amount of bread. By the way, I might say kazayis is tiny. Kazayis is the size of a matchbox. That which we eat on Pesach is lechumras, but the size is tiny. So we're talking about a very small amount of bread over here. And Ramesh says, once you have that, it vadai paters. Mashenkin, if you have less than a kazai, that's the suffix. Go out of the Mishnah Berurah says on Shabbos, then for sure it's going to pater because Shabbos has to give us a chashivas, the mitzvah is chashiv. So on Shabbos is no shaila. First of all, you have to have a kazayas. Anyways, you have to have a kabeh if you wash until sidayim. And on that, it'll definitely pater because of the chashivas that everything is tuffled to the cause of having a suda Shabbos, which of course is with bread. And this, what saying, is the hagdama to the sugya. Now, in the etzim sugya, which that's what we'll try to focus now, is there are, I find over here many madregas of when a person comes to eat foods in a meal which are coming not l'soiva. They're coming l'kinuach. For example, a person in the middle of the meal has an apple, a fruit cocktail, a peanut, a rice, all the different things that people have in the middle of a meal. The shaila is, when he makes a bracha on the bread, does the bread pater an apple? Now, after this hakdama, assuming that when he's having an apple in the middle of the meal, and that's what it says in the Gemara, assuming when he's having an apple in the meal, why is he having an apple in the middle of the meal? Probably having an apple in the middle of the meal. It's just not to fill him up. If that's his objective of having the apple in the middle of the meal, not to fill him up, or having a nut or some sweet thing, a candy, a chocolate, something in the middle of the meal, so then the bread shouldn't pater it. And that's be'emes what it says in the Shulchan Aruch, and that's be'emes what it says in the Gemara, and that's be'emes l'char pashit. But let's build that which is pashit. The Be'er Lach over here talks about different cases. And Tif Aleph in Dibra Maskal Kegoyin, the Be'er Lach discusses that let's say a person was meichen the apples in a way where it's clearly being done for satiating purposes, like an apple kugel or something of that sort. Or, he has let's say he has, like we said, an apple kugel. The Be'er Lacha brings over here, in bishul aperis biyachad with tepuchei adama. Sounds like if you guys are mitzvah l'shmoya to the Chavetz Chaim, tell your wife tonight, you have to cook the apples with the potatoes. If you're bishul the peris and together with the potatoes. So he says, that's just like chicken. That's just like rice. You made it in a satiating way. You made it in a meal type way. And this is why somebody has an apple kugel in the meal. It's a part of the meal. Even though it doesn't taste so much different than the, apple cake, but afal pikein, it's eaten in its surah of the meal in a satiating way. It's bottled to the cause of the meal, which is to satiate. And therefore it'll be patted with the bread. Ad kedei kach, Rabbeinu HaGadol, the Melech of all of Klal Yisrael, Rav Eliashiv, the Yadua, held that on fruit soup, the good old-fashioned fruit soup, Rabbi Yisai, but some gat in the hive. On fruit soup, Rav Eliashiv held that if it's in the place of soup, I remember in yeshiva, when they used to have one day, they would have this type of soup. One of the soups was a fruit soup, and it was served as a fruit soup. So if you're having a fruit soup as a fruit soup, he held that it's puttered to the bread, it's tuffled to the bread, and therefore you don't make a bracha on it, not on the pears, not on the juice. He held it was all part of the meal. Okay, you have to don. What if you're somebody that you take the fruit soup and you just take it and you wait till it's cold and just drink the broth, and maybe it's just like a drink of juice for you. So then anyways, it's a drink, and a drink we don't make brachas on in the Suda. So regardless, you wouldn't make a bracha in the middle of the Suda. But that's one type. When you have fruit, which is being, it's being served, and it's being prepared in a way where it's like a Suditika food. And the Mechaber in Shulchan Aruch, and that's why Pashit, Lamashal, let's say you have meat that they cook together. They have all types of oranges and dates and I don't know what, together with the chicken. There's no shaila that you would not make a bracha on that, and it would be pattered with the bread. The Shulchan Aruch and Tzid Gimel discusses the case. In Kovel Liftin Sudasa pears, let's say you're having a bread meal with apples, and that's the whole entire meal. And and not only that is it the whole entire meal, but it's the ikar of the meal. In Kovel Liftin Sudasa pears, you want to have fruit. You're also going to wash. So it says, then the pears become like Dvarim Abayim Machmas Asuda. And it says, even if you eat the pears, Petchila Sudasa without bread, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. He says, some argue, and therefore a toiv Everybody wants to look toiv in the Mishra's eyes. That it's better to eat petchila be'peris, but it's better at the beginning of the meal to start out having bread and an apple. And then if the rest of the meal you have pears, then that's okay. Even if you eat them by themselves, they wouldn't require bracha. That's a second type of case. A third type of case, says the Mishabur over here in Sif Aleph, is let's say he's eating pears in the middle of a meal, and the ikar of the meal is not the apples, and it wasn't processed the way we explained before to be, like cooked and looked like a kugel and the whole business. He's done having an apple in the middle of the Suda, but he's having the apple. If you ask him, why are you having the apple? I'm not having like some sweet thing. Why are you having a chocolate in the middle? No, I want to get full. Most people don't do that. Most people like the sweet taste in the middle of the meal. He's doing it to get full. On that, the Mishabura, he's got a big problem here. The Shulchan Aruch says, maskell with bread and with bread. The Mishabura brings down from the Bach and the Shla and the Taz and the Balatani, the Mogen Avram, the Chayodam. He brings down Yir Shemayim, it's Roy Lezoyer, Yesh Lahachim, all these L'shainis to have in the beginning. Don't get into the Shaila and to make a bracha on this apple before you have the bread. Meaning not before you wash, but that. I'll read his lashon. I read his lashon at the Taz. If you have apples that you want to get in the middle of a meal, it's not the ikar of your meal, and you have a suffix what to do. It's not my ikar of a meal. Mishabur would say, eat it. Don't eat it together with bread. And that way you get out of the shaila, which is that perhaps it's potted with the bread. But if you're the datka having it without, I'll read you the lashon 1 second. It's a suffix, basically.
Which you've cut? Which you've cut is the Ravid?
Out of the suffix, and you should have. So again, let me make this clear. We have the case of where it's fruit soup. We have the case of where it's an apple kugel. We have the case of where the apples are with the chicken. Those cases are all pashit. They're potted with the bread. We have a next level where I have a bread apple suda. Everything is apples. Then it's potted with the bread, but it's better the first bites to have with the bread. Then we have something that I'm having a regular meal and I'm having an apple, and the apple I want to fill up with. Then it's kedai to get out of the shaila and eat the apple without the bread and make a bracha on it. That's the third level. Now,
what does with bread mean? You have to put a piece of bread on the fruit. What is that? What is that?
It has to in your mouth at the same time while you're eating.
It should be in your mouth.
Yeah, it has to be at one point that it was together eating.
Oh, but all fruit, all bread has to be at the same time in your mouth. One piece of bread, a minute, 30 seconds later does not patter the fruit.
That wouldn't be good.
One time.
That's a big chumrah.
Come again?
Hard thing to do.
You only have to do it once at the beginning, right?
No.
Yes.
No, we're in the case of where you only have to do it in the beginning.
Not at the beginning of the Suda. At the beginning of the achil of that pri?
Yes.
The beginning of that pri, you have to eat with bread. We're going in the case of the toiv of the Mishnah Brura, of the Shulchan Aruch, of Siv Gimel. We're going with Siv Gimel, where my ikar meal is bread and apples, and that's common today. So you have to tell that person that he has to have bread in the beginning. In the beginning, you have a couple of bites with the apples, and that's it. And then the rest you can have without.
Put on Gimel. Let's see the Mishmur inside.
You should know, Rabbi, I said this case early on because it's a very common case. Today it's very common.
People also often eat a fruit at the beginning to fill them up, of course, so they won't eat so much during the Suda.
So that'll be the third case. The third case is when he has fruit that he's eating to fill him up, but he's going to have other things in the meal too. But he's eating the fruit to fill him up.
Right, I got
in that case, the Mishnah Brura says you should avoid the shaila and make the bracha on the Bari Priya 8 and don't eat it with bread.
Without the bread, right? Okay.
Right. Now, Rabbi Yisai, we get into the $1 million shaila, which is when he once and for all admits it, he's having chocolate, he's having candy, he's having an apple, he's having some nuts, he's having some almonds, he's having some cashews, and there he's obviously not having it to fill him up. It's kishmak. And you should know, the assumption is that's why you're having these things, unless you know you're having it for a different reason. But that's the ruach that you feel from the paiskim over here. And when I'm having a cashew in the middle of a meal, stop, I want something gishmak. And the mela, that's l'chayra, our sugya, that when you make a moitzi, why would it pater a cashew? Why should that moitzi pater an apple? And if that's the case, says Rabbeinu Agadol, the Shulchan Aruch Rabbeinu Agadol, and really the, all the paiskim over here, that ha'oichel peiros, if you're eating peiros, the toicha, even in the middle of the Suda. When we grew up, people thought it was something to do with dessert. Nothing to do with dessert. Bread doesn't pater an apple. If you're having the apple not to fill you up, you're having it because it's a disazach or a cashew or a pistachio nut. So then, even if you're having it in the middle of the meal, you make on it a bracha. And this, Rabbi Yisai, is the Shapura brings down that the only way out of this in Sivkat and Ches is if you ate it mamish with bread, then it's the regular rules of Iker V'Tafel that we'll learn about next week, not this new type of Iker V'Tafel. And then Echanami, Ad Kedei Kach, Mishabura says in Sivkat and Ches, in Chartzi and Yud Gimel, unbelievable thing. Let's say this guy's having a cashew and there's bread in his mouth. So he's eating the cashew with the bread. Okay, so now no bracha. Now he takes a cashew afterward. I don't think people realize this. Now he takes a cashew afterward that he's not having with bread. Now you make a bracha on that cashew. The first cashew was potted with the bread. This is that. Now, and the teretz is papashit l'chayra.
That's not the same as the apple, though, right? If I'm taking one apple, if I start it with the bread, then what? That's
again, the case of the apple was he was doing it limuzin. I'm talking.
No, I'm saying the case of the apple. I'm saying I'm taking an apple like I'm taking cashew. But
if you're taking an apple like a cashew and you're having it just like kinuach, then you do not make then you vade make a bracha on it, unless you're having it mamish with bread. So then the ones who eat with bread, they don't require a bracha.
Every bite I have to eat that apple with bread, or only some bites in that case?
Which case? I'm sorry.
Case like the cashew. Cashew, if I eat one cashew with bread, it's kosher. If I take another one, I have to make a bracha. How about if I take another bite on the apple? I ate the first bite with the bread. Now I want to take another bite of the apple.
If you're having it's the same thing. If the apple is being done the kinuach, then it's that. When I say cashew and apple, I mean anything the kinuach, or is it done the suda?
I'm saying every time I take a bite of the same apple, I have to make a bracha.
No. Once I made a bracha on the apple, it patters the rest of the apple.
I didn't make a bracha. I ate it with bread, like I did the first cashew.
Right, again. If I make if I'm taking an apple, likinuach, and I eat it with bread, it doesn't require bracha. Afterward, I take the same apple, I eat it without bread, and I'm eating it likinuach, I have to make a bracha.
This is my second bite of the apple. I'd have to make a bracha on it.
Correct. Now, the Bialoch and Zival de Bramaskal Kegoin brings down, he says, this even would go on potentially cooked fruit, what we so lovingly call kompot. He says it's from the Mogen Avram and the Shla, the Hoil Shein Regilin, Bialoch says Lashon. He says it's not for the Ikar Suda. Nobody has kompot as Ikar Suda. Over here, the Bialoch Tzugelekt, a couple of words over here. He said, how do we figure out what is, if let's say you don't know if you're doing it l'kinuach. He says you have to know what's ruggle. The normal thing is that people don't have kompot to fill them up. You don't have cooked fruit to fill you up. Nobody makes an ikar meal where having bread and kompot. It's not the norm. So that's called shaloi machmas asuda. This bialacha is a very important bialacha. Bialacha just told us that if a person wants to know, this is how you'll know. If you're saying, I'm bringing kompot, I don't know, I want to have some kompot now, and you don't know why you're having it. So now we know. You're doing it l'kinuach, and you're not doing it l'mazin, and therefore you would have to make a bracha on kompot. And this, Rabbi Yisai, for someone that learns the Mishabura, it seems to be quite clear. The Mishabura seems to say clear in Sivkot and Yud, in Sharatzi and Sivkot and Zayin, one of the most famous Mishaburas in the whole Sefer Mishabura, because it's one of the most spoken about Mishaburas. He says, Masha Mevi'in, sometimes they bring kompot. Ein bei lemazin klal. It's not coming for the purpose of satiating. It's coming for ziskite, and it needs a bracha. And the Sharatzian says, even in places, don't say, oh, today we have dessert and all these different things that people say. Mishabura says, I know there are places that have dessert. Even in places, shenagu lechol Paris, even they have it in every single meal. Everybody say, even we don't have it in every single meal. The Mishabura is saying there are places that have it in every single meal at the end of the meal. So he says, Gamkein, it's mistaber that it's not called chicken. Because saif, why do you do it? You're not doing it to be satiating, lamazin, lasaiva. You're doing it to have something sweet at the end of the meal. As a meal, the Mishnah Berurah and the Shartzian is borer 100%. That on kampot, in the middle of the meal, you make a bari priyates, assuming it's a fruit kampot, you make a bari priyates. And this Bamis, the Chazanish, in the Dinim Van Haggis, in Archaim Perk Vavai Zayin, brings down Maisa the Chazanish, ate kampot in the middle of the meal, and he made a bari priyates. Stipler in Orchos Rabbeinu and Chelik Aleph, in the 81st page, he brought down that the Stipler would make a bari priyates in the middle of the meal on kampot. Ishlam Zalman is brought down. Eliashiv in the same bracha is brought down. It seems to be that this is certainly the pashtus by the Svardim. The Orlatzian is brought down. He says, why not? He says it's from Persian Shulchan Aruch. And he says the cane is dicker, and even places the Orlatzian says that they bring Paris in the beginning of the meal at chasanas and whatnot. He says they're coming to have a nice first course, and therefore you make a bracha on it. And this is the psak of the Svardim. Rav Vajosef in Chelik Kesim in Yud brings down. He says, why not? You make a bari priyates. In Bnei Brak, Rav Nisgarelitz writes like this. He says, Masha Oimrim the Chafetz Chaim was Chayzer by. Now, Stamazay, you should realize one thing, that the Helika Bashefer chose the Chafetz Chaim to write the Sefer Mishnah Berurah. But it was written, the Sefer Chafetz Chaim, the Helika Bashefer wrote it through the Chafetz Chaim. That says that the Chafetz Chaim was the pen of the Helika Bashefer to get these psakim out to Klal Yisrael. And there's no shaila that a person that wants to know what's the psak of the Mishnah Berurah, which is our Rebbe. The Mishnah Berurah is our Rebbe. Mishnah Berurah is our Rebbe. Chafetz Chaim is not our Rebbe. Mishnah Berurah is our Rebbe. And the Chafetz Chaim in the Sefer Mishnah Berurah writes that on Kampot you make a bari priyates, and there is no shaila. That's the psak of Mishnah Berurah. And not only that, he bavorns that don't think I don't know that there are places that have dessert at every meal. Rabbi said, we don't have dessert at every meal. Half the meals we don't have dessert, we just run out. But the Chafetz Chaim said, I know that there are places that have dessert at every meal, and at every single meal they have kampot. So maybe someone will come along and say that's a part of the meal. Mishpur says there's no such svar. Absolutely no such svar. Why should the bread pot to the kampot? That was the psak of the Mishnah Berurah. Reb Nissen says, it's Yadua, there's some type of a shmua. Reb Nissen's in page 168. In Chelik Beis, in HilchOS. He says, I'm Asharmim from the Chafetz Chaim is Chayzer. And he said, not to. He says, Zaina, it can't possibly be. Because the reason they say that the Chafetz Chaim was Chayzer is because the Chafetz Chaim saw, today they bring it out everywhere and whatever, and there's dessert everywhere. The Chafetz Chaim writes in first that he knew that, Matthias. So he says, maybe what the Chafetz Chaim was talking about was what we spoke about already. That maybe someone saw the Chafetz Chaim have bread and not make a bracha on the kampot. Oh, very good. Maybe that's because the Chafetz Chaim was eating it to fill him up. And we saw before that there's a very big tzad to say if that's your ikon meal, then it's bemis potted with the bread. Maybe there's a toiv to have the first bite with bread. And this is why it's very, very schwer to not make a bracha on kampot, on apples, on chocolate, and all these things in the middle of a meal. And the fact that the dessert all the time, again, the Chafetz Chaim Elaine is not muchach. Perhaps the mistake was that the Chafetz Chaim Taka, like I said, he was an older man, and the entire meal was bread and some apples or some kampot. Maybe the Chanami by the Chafetz Chaim. That's really the first in Shulchan Aruch and Siv Gimel. And if you'd have an older person, that's his meal. So then it's quite possible that it is potted with the bread. Maybe you should have the first bite. Now, I would be remiss that Tzaddik Reb Shlomo, that they say was the Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim, in page 119, they bring down Siper Rabbi Chafetz Chaim Savar that kampot at the end of a meal. It's Varim Abayim B'toich Chasud of Ein Tzarich Levarich Alav. It's true. I'm not going to deny that there are shmuas. In the Orchos Rabbeinu, in page 81, they asked Rav Mendel Zaks, the son of Rav Mendel Zaks, the Seiteinik of the Chafetz Chaim, that there's a shmua that the Chafetz Chaim was Chayzer. And he said, V'amar li aviv agoyin Rav Mendel shal Chafetz Chaim. My father, Rav Mendel Zaks, asked the Chafetz Chaim, V'amar shadas noite, that you do have to make a bracha. My father, Rav Mendel Zaks, said you do have to make a bracha. Kanira, Chafetz Chaim Ba'atzma didn't make a bracha. And he says, like we said, maybe by him, he was an old man, and by him, this was the Iker meal, and maybe by him, it was considered a part of the meal, therefore he didn't make a bracha. In the Alibid HILCHOS, they asked this question in the 54th page of the 30th volume, Terchaim Kanievsky, and he writes, after they bring down the Mishnah Berurah, that there's a Shemua, Chofetz Chaim was chayzer, Shemati Shema Shoimrim, the Chofetz Chaim was chayzer, was talking about Simis, a whole new mahalach. The Chofetz Chaim was chayzer, he was talking about Simis. We know that anyone who learns the Simin over here gets a big shock. And he sees that even on vegetables, Chofetz Chaim has a tzad that you make a bracha in the middle of a meal. It seems to be that the way they ate vegetables and the way we ate vegetables are different. We ate vegetables, it's a part of the mazin, it's a part of the satiating food and whatnot. They seem to have it as like a nice extra, maybe not a sweet extra, maybe as a more of a not bitter, but more of a horrific extra. So the Chofetz Chaim has a tzad that attack on things like simis. It used to not call it was their kompot. Of them, Zok the Chofetz Chaim Kanievsky, that shmu of the Chofetz Chaim was talking about simis. That today, forget, we eat simis, not the way we eat kompot. We eat it like the chicken, we eat it like the potatoes. But he's not talking about regular kompot. Then Mr. Mishnah Berurah is maybe a little bit mashma like that. Mishnah Berurah says Paris mevushalim, and kompot is taka maybe Paris. Mashenkin maybe taka. The shmu of the Chofetz Chaim was about simis, and then that would really be miyashiv really everything. The Rebbe Sternbach, he says,
Who?
Rebbe Sternbach in Chelik Aleph, in the 177th Siman, which is also the Siman we're learning, says we have eight the Chofetz Chaim is chayzer. He brings, like I said, from the Tzaddik Reb Shleima. He brings down in the Agadama of the Lev Eliyahu. He brings down by Brisker Rov that they would dafka eat bread together with kompot because they were mesupik about this. So he writes like this: Eitzel Kama Tzadikim, they're mechalik that Shabbos maybe is different because Shabbos you always have dessert, you always have kompot, and therefore it's mamish chelik of the meal, and therefore no bracha. But Mashenkein in the weekday, they don't always have kompot, they don't always have a meal, so then you wouldn't make a bracha. You would make a bracha. He brings this from some Goyin Raveli Melech Rumpler, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Now, Gopanim Rabbi Yisai is no shaila, and somebody that does like it says Pashim Shah in the Sefer Mishnah Berurah. Is Vadai doing the right thing? And anyways, there are many terutzim here which would stim with the Mishnah Berurah. Nobody here on Simis is making a bracha in the middle of a meal. So therefore, I think it's miyushiv hakol. Now, and this is even if he brings fruit in the beginning of a meal. It's no difference if it's in the middle of the meal, the end of the meal. It could be, there's a whole shaila about an appetizer. No, that it's quite possible that it's coming to help the meal, but that's very difficult to be kaveya when they're bringing out fruit today. I don't know if the fruit is the acid is opening up the stomach or not. I don't know if anybody even knows that Metzias anymore. And lo pashut b'chlal. Vegetables today, that I hear, they give out this Waldorf salad. You know, it has like apples in it with mayonnaise and things like that. That I hear you wouldn't make a bracha because there you see the tzura of how they give it out. It has a certain like quality of being a chelik of the meal. Mishnah Berurah and Ziv Gandalad, like I said, he shocks us. He says when you eat the tzimis, Taka should pater it with some other pre or whatever. But today there's no shaila that on tzimis you don't make a bracha in the middle of the meal. Now on Leil Rosh Hashanah, there's no shaila like we spoke out. On the date you have to make a bracha. That's for sure. But what about a lot of times they have these other simonim, which clearly nobody's eating except for the simon themselves. Very fair to say that they're boyim machmas asuda for a different reason. They're not coming lemazin or lesuda. It's very interesting. The Mariel, in HILCHOS Rosh Hashanah Yizid Beis, he brings down that on the karti and all these things, he didn't make a bracha, and he held it was machmas asuda. However, and the Kaf Chaim brings that. However, I see the Elif HaMogin on the Mat Ephraim, he says these things are not ragol lava mitay chasuda, and he says you do have to make a bracha on them. What I try to do is I always try to pater it. I try to take a piece of watermelon or something, or a banana or something, and I try to pater it because the simanim they're driving at the beginning of the meal are clearly not lemuzin. They're not coming to satiate. They're coming for the simon. It's very schwer to say that they're pater to the bread.
Is there an Indian maybe to solve this problem by eating the simanim before the Suda? Is it clear in Allah you have to eat the simanim b'taycha Suda?
As a matter of fact, someone told me that they have the minig that right after Kiddush they do the simanim.
People do
I don't love it because if you have a minig, it's a minig. I don't love it because it spouts a little bit the Kiddush Makam Suda.
that. You have a problem with Kiddush Makam Suda?
A little bit. And this brings us, Rabbi Isai, to one of the more difficult shmuas of our time. The shmua that on ice cream, Rabbeinu HaGadol, Pashut Rash Bahag, the Melech of all of Klal Yisrael, and Moshe Feinstein Zeichet Tzadik Levracha, is known to have been in his name, at least in the name of Rav Moshe, it was known that the name of Rav Moshe said that on ice cream and a meal, you don't make a bracha. I must tell you, after hearing this whole sugya, this is one of the most difficult shmuas that is from Rav Moshe. The truth is, Rabbi say, what could be the hesber in such a shmua? They all types of various shmuas. They say ice cream is really a liquid, and therefore you don't make a bracha on it in a meal. Now, first of all, ice cream is not a liquid. That's also second of all, and third of all. Anybody having ice cream in the form of a liquid, then he's not having ice cream. He's having melted something. Okay. Most of the time, everyone gets this ice cream at the meal and they start hacking about what's the bracha. By the time they finish hacking about the bracha, it's taka liquid. Okay. But the ice cream is not a liquid because it's not, and you don't eat it as a liquid. And the nafkamina is taka, the amount of the shear. When a person eats a kazayis of ice cream, he has to make a bar in the fashes. It's not totally in a revius, and the amount of time he gets is not 15 seconds. He gets kedeach his bras because he's eating a solid. So therefore, ice cream is not a liquid, number one. Number two is, who said this exeris custard that liquids in the middle of a meal you don't make a bracha on? Half the sugya is discussing why we don't make brachos on water. HaRav wine we make a bracha on in the middle of the Suda. Avada theoretically on a liquid, many Rishonim held we would make brachos on liquids. We don't, because we say the liquid is coming for the same purpose as the meal. It's coming to get the food down. It's coming to satiate, to get the food inside, whatever. So we don't make a bracha on a liquid, but it's not exeris custard liquids in a meal don't get. It's a liquid which is on the same team as the, let's say I have a liquid which is 100% not on the same team as the satiating. For example, a milkshake. It's clearly coming to geschmack and zis and fakir. You're thirsty after you have it. Why wouldn't you make a bracha? Why wouldn't you make a bracha? It's like there's a custom on liquids. You don't make a bracha. Why wouldn't you make a bracha? And therefore, on ice cream, number one, it's not a liquid, and number two, it's even if it would be a liquid, it's not coming on the same team. It's coming as a zizkat. It's a davar pasha that you make a shahakal. And Rosh Zalman is brought down in a few places in the Mishnah Berurah of Rav Levensol. On Kufayin Zayin Sivkatan Dalid, he brings down that on ice cream, ices, sorbet, all these things. He says you brings from Rosh Zalman, you make a bracha. You make a bracha. The Rabbeinu HaGadol of the Yashiv is brought down in the Zayis Bracha Perches Arches. Says why not? It's clearly coming not to satiate. Nobody eats ice cream to fill him up. Scheinberg is brought down like that. The Shevet Levi and Chel Gal of Siman Reishei. He has a Aras Hagoyas and Siman Kofayin Dalid. He says Avadi you make a bracha on chocolate, on ice cream. He says Pshita. Pshita, it has nothing to do with regular liquids. He says the Harbe Toyim Bezem. Many make a mistake about this. Chaim Kanievsky in that same Alibid HILCHOS on the 30th page in the 30th volume in the 54th page, he says, Glid is not a mashka, so you have to make a bracha on it. And this l'chayr definitely should have been the pashtus. L'maisa, there's a gibber from Rav Moshe Nishtazeh, and it must tell you, I don't know, does anybody here have Adis that he is willing to give us that he knows 100% that this is what Rav Moshe said? It is a
we have here a Mipir Shmua. First of all, they have the sites where the second Klishenis are. One is in something called Rishumei Aaron. No idea what that is. The second is in Tsayar, so they're Klishenis. But allegedly, they asked of David why this is different than the Magen Schnapps. And he gave a svara. It's in the Bartabam of Rav David. So I don't know if that counts.
Someone,
But
someone told me that
Can
he
you ask-
heard again, Nachum b'Shem Rav Moshe.
Why is the bracha? Why isn't it kinua?
Sorry?
So what does that mean? What do you mean? You have to have, you can change your mind every single time what something is? Either ice cream is kinuach or it's not kinuach. Stam ice cream is kinuach. I don't know. So they asked the Shaila about why it's different than the schnapps, and he says, allegedly, you can give it whatever you want to give it, that the glid b'sefer suda creates a pool on the person that similar to shtias mashkem teicha suda, and therefore, if somebody doesn't feel that way, and it's only l'tainug, and it's not machmechila, and then Moshe maybe would have been might you need a bracha. It's not a clear svara. I don't know.
I would say that because it's been mipia shmua, and it's a difficult shmua, and it's against all the paiskim, that if somebody makes a shakal, if you could pater it, you should try to pater it. The covered Rav Moshe alone, you should pater it. But if a person, I always try to pater it. But let's say a person is stuck at, I don't know, a HBrachos, like I would not stuck Chalila, but let's say he's stuck without something to pater. And to go and be that from a guy and go and, can I come into the kitchen and can I have a jelly bean? And, and then I tell him, no, that jelly bean has beetle backs on it. I mean, I don't want to be that guy. If a person is stuck and to say, what's the big deal? Just keep a little bread at the end of the meal. Sometimes it doesn't work like that with the HBrachos. Sometimes they take away the food before I even ate it. So if I'm stuck, I'll make a shahako like the Bachas HaPaiskim.
Yes.
That's a Baisai Pachas a Yaitzer, that's Siv Aleph. Now, over here in Siv Beis, it's something very interesting, which I want to bring out to the Oilam.
A second before you go fight, can you use water for that?
How could you use water? Water gets patted with the bread.
No, could you use water to take care of Moshe's problem?
I don't understand.
You said you used candy. Can you use water?
No, how could you use water? Water gets patted with the bread.
Yeah, but you're using the
water. You can only make a bracha on if you're thirsty, but it's definitely buying l'soiva, meaning not definitely, but it's definitely a drink. You should definitely can't pat it. Now, the Shulchan Aruch Beis describes a scenario which would seem not so negeya, but it could be it's extremely negeya. He talked about a case of where you're moshech yedeya min hapas. Shulchan Aruch discusses a case of where a person no more is having bread. The whole vort is everything is tuffle to the bread. But what if you have a scenario of where the bread is gone? I'm done with the bread. Now, how could you say things are tuffle to the bread? Now, that doesn't mean that if a person ate bread and then after he finishes the bread, like most of us do, he then has the chicken and whatever, and he's not having any more bread because he doesn't even have any more bread. But that's not called, he was moshech yedeim in a pas, where he removes the pas, he doesn't want to have anything to do with that meal anymore. It's punkti, ran out of pas, but it's all a hemshich of that meal. But what if I have a situation of where the bread is removed, bedafka, and I don't want to have anything to do with the bread anymore? What's a good example of this? Bi'alacha and Siv Beis and the B'machzor She'ein. Excuse me. He discusses maybe if I actually move the table, or if I remove the tablecloth, etc. What's this negay us? So there's two cases. One case, interesting, they have more in Eretz Yisrael than in America. And one case we'll see everywhere has. One case they have more in Eretz Yisrael is that sometimes there's no room on the floor of the chasana to have the dancing and the actual meal. So they push it and move the tables. And they move them legamre, and they get rid of the tables. And as a matter of fact, there'll be dessert afterward, and people just take dessert and figure out where to sit. But the tables are taken away legamre. And because of this, the Shevet Levi, in Chelik Aleph, Reish Hey, in Siman Kufayin Zayin, brings down that even though the poskim say that it's not negeya today, we don't have this type of thing, he says, well, today we do. At a Simchas Chazan V'Kala, they take the table away legamre, and they remove tables so that people could dance. Well, if he's today at a chasana, you'd have to make a bracha before and after. It's considered a separate meal and nothing to do with that meal. Cain, what we spoke about last week, kofay involved before the meal. And this Rabbi Isai, they say, with Rabbi Yashiv held like this also. When they move over the tables, he says it's called a silika shulchan, and you have to make a bracha before and after. Now, am I right to say in America, that's not how it goes in the chasana halls? They don't move the tables. Is that correct?
No, sometimes they started doing that.
They started doing that?
They started doing that in the last 10 years. Yes.
Okay, so then this is a very negeh shaila. I see that that Rav Sheinberg and Rav Shlomo Zalman are brought down in the Sefer Zayis HaBracha as saying that they're not doing it for the purpose of making a separate meal. They're doing it for the purpose of just being able to dance. So it's like a hemshich of the original meal. But these are difficult svaras, Rabbi Isai. I certainly, you have a big problem here because you can't pater, because to pater before is okay. What are you going to do about it afterward? So what I tell people, if you could save a little piece of bread, no halavai. But if not, it is definitely a shayla. I mean, these are the biggest names everybody said that are arguing over here. Now, at my chasana, I had a little bit of a svara in the middle of the chasana.
So you
when
have
I
to
realized
make a bracha. A second, you have to make a bracha on all.
According to
everything.
this, you have to make a bracha rishayna and a bracha achrayna because it's nothing to do with the previous meal.
You have to make an eight. You have to make a mezainis. You have to make a shach.
Whatever it is, yeah, mezainis, all the things. For example, let's say cake. Let's say
if they leave the head table.
So at my chasana, I was thinking, Lamaisa, they left the head table. They left that table. Maybe you could say everything is bottled to that head table, especially because that's where the HBrachos is. I was thinking that also. First of all, not at every chasana did they do that.
Did you hear the shaila?
They just move everything away.
If you're going to say Kirsha Shulchan, you're destroying the whole hall. So how can you have HaBrachos and how is it all? How do you have the Suda? Sudas Nasuin. You just start all over again.
It's not schwer. You still not have HaBrachos as long if they take away the whole table, you can still have HaBrachos. Why not? Now the case where this is Nageir by Isai is Erev Pesach Shechal Yos b'Shabbos, because there we found the scenario of where when I'm not eating bread, I'm bedafka not eating bread, and halachically I'm not eating bread. And I don't want bread anymore because I'm not allowed to have matzah on that day. And I definitely don't want bread because we reached the Zman of the Yisr, or because I'm scared to have bread around. So there you have a real emes of moishich adam in a pas. And therefore this should have been considered a real emes, siluk hashulchan. And l'chayra on Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos, you should have to make brachos. This shaila seems to have been addressed by the great Rabbi Yehuda Chassid and the Taisus Rabbi Yehuda in Brachos Daf Mem Aleph, where he says he seems to be going on the same type of shaila. He's talking about by a little bit different. He's talking about the Korban Pesach. He says, "Mikom pas pateres yafa birchas shako mechilus Pesach." He has a nidin that Ava b'shaychon said beloy pas. He says, "Chayra lefi the rabbanon that when you eat the Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to have it with matzah. That means you already ate the matzah and you have to finish the matzah. So now you have to make a shackle on the Korban Pesach. And ein maftir nacha Korban Pesach afikarm, you can't have matzah afterward. So now I have a halachic reason I'm not going to have matzah afterward. So did the matzah pater the Korban Pesach? Of them zokt the Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, it paters. Ki mash and nechol beloy pas, that which you're eating it afterward without bread is einai el lemachmas mitzvah. It's not the pshat that I don't want bread now. It's a din. That is halacha. So that doesn't take away from its tefillah to the suda. I understand that what he means is that moishach yidayim in a pas means that I'm done with the bread meal and I'm starting a different meal. Dessert, potentially, let's say in my case of the wedding, if you would buy this, that's a different meal. There's the meal and then there's a dessert meal, a whole different meal. Mashen came back Korban Pesach, it's not a different meal. It's a din that you can't have bread. But within this meal, you can't have bread in this meal at this point. But it's not the pshat, it's a different meal. When it's, I want bread now it's dessert. It's not time for bread. I don't want bread now. So Bishlama in a regular Shabbos meal, you don't say that because it's all part of the same meal and you're not throwing away the bread. It's just, that's how you're eating. But at a wedding where you take away the tables and you make a whole different surah, okay? You have to take away the table and everything. Mashayin, when it comes to Erev Beitzah Shabbos, we could use this for Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. There, it's all one big meal. It's just in this meal, there's a loch. I can't have bread. This is l'chay Rabbi Zay. The guys is sugya of Simon Kufayin Zayin. Lama Machan Sikum. It's a geschmack sugya. The chakir is it the bread that's pattering? Excuse me, is it tuffle to the bread? Is it tuffle to the birchas hamaz, to the birchas hamaitzi? The barim abayim machlon student we pass like Taisus or Ben Yaina is it means things that are coming on the same team. They satiate. The question is not why is chicken. Not why is an apple not pottered with bread? The question is why in the world would chicken be pottered with the bracha of hamaitzi? And that we explain because the chicken's on the same team, but berega the apple is not on the same team, then about it's not going to be pottered with the bread. You have to make a bracha. If you have a little bit of bread, it's a big shayla in Mishabru if it patters, especially if you're doing it just to patter. Or Moshe said it depends on kazayas or less than a kazayas. Mishabru says you should try to avoid the situation unless it's Shabbos. Fruit soup, simis. Things that were prepared in a mazendik way are clearly battered. Mashain kain. If it's the whole meal is bread and fruit, then it's not 100%. You still try in the beginning to have the bread with the fruit. If you're having fruit to satiate, in addition to all the other foods, there the Mishabura said that's a very big shaila. You should probably just eat the fruit by itself so that you can make a bracha on the fruit. If it's clearly the kinuach, like in pot, you make a bracha in the middle of the Suda Mamish. Either Shmuas of the Chavetz Chaim, so either the Chavetz Chaim was talking about himself when he was an older person, that was his meal, or it was talking about Simis, or we're Talmidim of the Mishnah Berurah, not of the Eilik Chavetz Chaim. And that was the minig zikr of most of the poskim to make yes a bracha. Ice cream, I would think you definitely would make a bracha. Legabe, the simonim on Rosh Hashanah, I would think you should try to pater the adamas. Certainly the eitzes you have to make a bracha on. Legabe, Moishchim Yudayim and Abbas. So that the Maisa is a gemulta case by the case of chametz and Pesach, chametz on the Erev Pesach Shabbos. It would seem that it would be not a problem because that's a din. That doesn't show it's a different suda. But by the chasen, that's a very big shaila. Maybe it's called a different suda.
If we're here, let's ask an American chasana shaila. At some chasanas, they have the Vini's table. But it's in a different room. So I know this could be a Shinyamak and Mishul also. So it's not you being Oker the table, you're being Oker yourself into a different room.
In the different room, they bring it back to the original room or they eat it in the other room?
So the food is generally in the other room, right? Or the food is in the other room. Now, they sometimes...
And they eat it in the other room?
Yeah. There's different scenarios, obviously, but there is such a scenario that you eat it at a family...
And the meal is done inside? The whole meal is done inside?
Meal is done, and then instead of serving you dessert, or in addition to serving you desserts on the table, you now prepare to start all over again, eating all the caloric stuff on the other side.
I would be very scared in that case to not make a bracha acharina. But I'd also be very scared to make a bracha acharina, but I'd be very scared in that case to say it's a part of the first meal.
Say it is part of the first meal?
No, meaning I would be very scared to consider it a part of the first meal. I would think it's not.
Even if you'll go back and bench in the other room for HBrachos.
Even though you're going to go back for HBrachos, so maybe that connects
you have to eat it in the other room. It's not designed to take back.
I mean, at the end of the day, don't forget the whole Sif Beis. He's going to go back to the room also to make a birchas hamazon, right? So it's not like it's over yet. I don't know. I don't like it. Sounds pretty gefährlich to me.
All right, this is all American Chatzon Shailas. It does happen. Okay, Yasher Koyach, Mazel Tov again.
Thank you. You just told me I saved $20,000.
Okay, Rabbi say there'll be a